Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for today's episode of Real Estate Disruptors. Today we have Jared J.R. Piper, fair cash offer, another Phoenix guy. And he's going to talk about how he brings home $20,000 a month passively while traveling the world. If this is your first time tuning in, I am Steve Trang, sales trainer for some of the top wholesalers in the country, and I'm on a mission to create 100 millionaires. Question I get a lot is how do you become one of the 100 millionaires? Information on this podcast alone is enough to help you become a millionaire in the next 5 to 7 years. Take consistent action and you will become one. When you hear a nugget, please type it in the comment section after the show, identify your single biggest takeaway, and focus on just that for the next 7 days. If you get value today, please tag a friend below, share this episode right now. That way we can all grow together. And this is a live show, so please ask your questions for JR to answer. You ready?
Ready.
All right, so first question is, what got you into real estate?
First of all, thanks for having me on the show, Steve. It's good to be here,
It's
man.
good to have you.
Yeah,
here.
finally. So I've actually been in real estate since 2011 or 2012, somewhere in there. And I was actually working a corporate job, and I had a buddy that was doing a lot of wholesale and fix and flips and stuff out of the trustee sale, right? Lots changed since then, but back then.
But there were a lot of those guys doing that back then.
Yeah, back then that's where everybody went to get discount properties. Mm-hmm. So he was doing probably 5 or 10 deals a day out of the trustee sale auctions, just killing it. And this was 2011, so just like there's a million foreclosures every single day. And he started selling properties to another buddy of mine who had made a bunch of money and was just parking money in real estate. Okay. And these two guys approached me and they asked me if I wanted to get involved. Basically, they needed someone to manage the day-to-day of like rehabbing the properties and overseeing the property management. I knew nothing about real estate at the time, but I was actually working a night shift in a treatment facility in Mesa. And so I was working the night shift, and then during the day I was driving around checking on contractors, and I made a lot of mistakes during that time. I was like hiring contractors off of Craigslist and made a lot of mistakes on someone else's dime, but I learned a lot in that period. And so I loved it. I was fascinated by the whole process, and I started going to real estate school to get my license. So at night, I was working the night shift. I was studying in the back office in between like busy, hours. Mm-hmm. And I was studying for my real estate exam. And then I would go during the day and drive properties and check on contractors and deal with tenants and the foreclosure stuff and all the different things we were doing. And eventually I actually got fired from that job. And
the night job.
Yeah. Got fired from that job. And it forced me into real estate full time. So it's, sink or swim time. Mm-hmm. And I started working with these guys, brokering deals as their realtor once I got my license. And I worked as a realtor for a number of years with a, focus on investing. And I basically, since I started watching these guys buy a rental portfolio and build a rental portfolio out of the trustee auctions, I always had it in my mind that passive income was like the goal. And so I started saving some money and looking to invest in real estate myself. So 2013, I bought my first rental, and then I started doing some fix and flips. And I think it wasn't until 2016 or 17 that I actually stopped working as a realtor for other people and just focused full time on investing myself.
These guys are still in the business?
Yeah, the one that bought all those houses he's got other businesses, but he still owns a large rental portfolio. The other guy is involved, but he's also pretty passive at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they made a killing in those times.
Yeah.
Don't really need to work too hard right now.
Yep.
Okay, so you made a lot of mistakes, but they weren't on your dime. So were there any challenges then getting into real estate?
I mean, learning project management when I knew nothing about construction or how to find contractors or how to manage them.
So they just threw you to the wolves. They're like, hey, we need a project manager. Go figure it out.
Yeah, it was a classic case of right place at the right time. Uh-huh. They came to me and they said, hey, this guy wants to buy a bunch of houses and rent them out, but he doesn't want to deal with any of it. Like he just wants to put up the money and do nothing. And so we want you to do the grunt work, right? And it's, in hindsight, it's like I got paid very little to do that. But I always tell people, if I go back and do it again, I do it for free because I learned so much in that first year of doing that it would have taken me several years to learn on my own.
So What did you get compensated for doing all that?
I think I was getting $1,000 per remodel and 5% of the gross rents per month.
Yeah. So that's not awful.
It wasn't terrible, but
Yeah.
$700 a month was like the average rent. And so it was a few hundred bucks a month. But there was a lot of time involved in it.
For sure. The only reason why I bring this up, because there's people like, how do I get started? What do I do? And I always say, like, one of the options if you don't have money is just go work for somebody.
Yeah.
And learn on their dime, which you did. I know it was expensive dime for them.
Yeah.
Right? But the experience you get far outweighs the financial compensation you're trying to get. But a lot of people can't wrap their head around that.
Yeah. It's invaluable.
Yeah. So you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Because I want some of the people that are listening to appreciate the value of that.
Yeah. Excuse me. So people who know how I started in real estate, sometimes say, man, you were so lucky. Like you had these heavy hitters that you were just attached at the hip to from day one. And it's true. I was very fortunate to be in that position. But the truth is, they weren't like pulling any favors for me, right? I was friends with these guys. I've known both of them for most of my life. But we have a very clear distinction between our business relationship and our friendship, right? And this was a business relationship.
Yeah.
And so they weren't doing me any favors. They didn't take it easy on me when I made mistakes. I was in the position that I was in to do that and presented with that opportunity because of the value I brought.
Yeah.
I like I say, right place, right time. They just needed someone that they trusted who was intelligent enough to like manage it. And I just happened to be sitting in the car with them when they were having that conversation. Right. But what I tell people who are new, who want to, everybody wants to be the guy, right? Everybody wants to have a big team and run a 7-figure business. What I tell people is, if you're starting out, sometimes it makes sense to just not worry about the money or the outcome and just get attached to somebody who's doing what you want to be doing.
Right.
And the most important part about that is figure out a way to add value to their life and their business. And then by proximity, you will learn what they're doing. And as you start to save some money and create your own opportunities, you can do what they were doing.
Right. So what was your first deal in, like JR's first deal?
My first deal, that's tricky because like I said, I was a realtor and I had bought my first rental property in 2013. It was a Maryville house, which I actually just sold last year. I bought that house for $53,500. I put $10,000 into it. I had a hard money loan at like 10 or 12% interest, and which I refinanced out of a couple years later. I just sold that last year for $205,000.
Nice.
But my first wholesale deal. So I'll tell you two stories actually. So as a realtor, I had someone come to me at one point and said, "Hey, my landlord wants to sell his house, and I'm going to put him in touch with you." Okay. And so I had this conversation with the landlord, and he, for whatever reason, he didn't want to list the property on the MLS, and he said, "I will pay you a 3% commission if you bring me a buyer." And I said, "How much do you want for the house?" He said, $100,000. I thought it was super realistic. I thought I could probably sell it for more than that. So I went out and I found a buyer, and I came back to him, and the buyer paid $110,000. Now, the extra 3%, the extra 10,000, 3% of $10,000, it wasn't much, right?
Right.
But the seller made an extra $10,000. He was thrilled about it.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me after that closed, if I had a way to just buy that property and resell it, I could have made the $10,000.
Yeah.
And he still would have been happy because he got what he wanted. Like, it would have been truly a win-win,
Right.
And so, I that was like a missed opportunity, but something clicked that, hey, there's a better opportunity here than being a realtor, right? And so my first deal, I actually did a few different deals with my buddy that I mentioned in the beginning, right? And I would basically find a deal on the MLS or something, and I would lock it up, and I would call my buddy and say, "Hey, I think I got a deal. This is a good deal." And he would sell it, and we would split the profit 50-50. And the first time that it occurred to me that I could really do it on my own was when I locked up the deal. I partnered with him. He worked on it to find a buyer, but I actually found a buyer who wanted it, and he sold it. And then my buyer called me back after, we had sold it and said, "I'll take it." And I said, "It's already sold." But it occurred to me then, I can actually just do this on my own. I don't need help anymore, And so I would say the first one that really like hit home was when I drew that line in the sand, and it was like 2016 or 2017, and I just made a decision because I loved investing in real estate, and I didn't love being a realtor. It was good money. It was good money, right? But it wasn't. I wasn't passionate about it. Mm-hmm. I wanted to focus all my time and energy on investing. I started marketing in 2016 or 17, direct mail, sent out 10,000 letters my first month of marketing, and I got a deal immediately, and I made $40,000 on. Mm-hmm. And that's when it was like, okay, there's something to this.
Yeah.
And it's time to blow it up.
It's crazy. So you became real, you're doing direct mail pieces, and that's working. At which point were you like, okay, I've got this passive income goal, this is what I'm going to do, or I got this lifestyle goal? Like, when did you have that epiphany or clarity?
Yeah. So like I said, so from day one, because I started working with guys that were buying houses at trustee sale, and well, the one guy anyway was just buying houses to rent them out. That was his whole focus. I kind of started with that mindset of like, I want to buy real estate, acquire as much as I can, and generate as much passive income as I can, because I observed that he had nothing to do with the properties or the construction or the business itself. Mm-hmm. And he was making, you know, once it got scaled up and stabilized, like he was making 20, 30 grand a month,
right?
You know? And so it was like, well, that's what I want, you know? So that's kind of always been the focus. Mm-hmm. And as I started wholesaling and flipping houses consistently, I always have looked at the bigger picture. I mean, I love wholesaling. I enjoy flipping. I try to avoid flipping a lot of houses because I don't love managing construction, but I've always viewed flipping and wholesaling as a way to spin off a ton of cash, mm-hmm. so that I can afford to invest in assets that will pay me passively while I sleep, while I travel, do whatever I want.
So the passive income was clear from your mentors, your friends. Mm-hmm. When was the traveling thing like, oh, this is what I got to do?
Yeah.
When did you get the travel bug?
So I want to say 2015, I took my first big trip anyway, to the Philippines, and I traveled through Southeast Asia for maybe five or 6 weeks. I went to several countries, and it was just a really life-altering moment for me. Mm-hmm. Like it awoke my spirit in a way that nothing else really had, and ever since I've just tried to travel every opportunity that I get. You know, it's a lot like having kids, I think. I don't have kids, but from what I hear, like, you're never quite ready, you know? So I always think of booking trips, like, kind of like that. Like, there's never going to be a perfect time. You're never going to have all your ducks lined up and in a row, and it's like everything's ready. Like, you just got to, I shut my eyes and I book it, mm-hmm. right? I watch travel deal websites, and I'll see a deal pop up, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm going to Japan next month, right. You know, like I'm out.
Oh, wow. Just like that.
Just like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I did, 2015, I took a couple big trips. I did a trip to Southeast Asia. I did a trip through South America with a couple friends. We drove from Phoenix, Arizona to Santiago, Chile.
And we're back. All right, guys. Sorry about that. So, yeah, we were talking that JR was shipping his car through Panama. So talk about that.
Yeah, so the South America trip, we drove from Phoenix to Santiago, Chile, shipped the car across the Panama Canal, mm-hmm. and at 3 months, got shaken down by a lot of border agents, got pulled over.
Well, let's explain. What does shaken down mean? Not everyone has world experience here. What does shaken down mean?
So in South America, and I'm sure many other parts of the world, when you cross a border by vehicle, you have to go through a whole process. Now, like if you cross from Mexico into the United States, it's a pretty structured, straightforward process, right? Yeah. It's organized. Mm-hmm. Now, crossing from like El Salvador into Honduras, not so organized. It's literally like you drive up to the border, you got to park in a line of cars, you go into a little hut, they give you a piece of paper, you go down the block, around the corner, second house on the left, you give it to them, they give you a different piece of paper, you take that down the block and around the corner, you wake up a guy that's sleeping in a hammock, and he rolls over and prints something off on a printer that's for some reason laying next to the hammock, hands that to you, you take it across the street, you get it stamped, you go back to the first place. It's like insanity.
I did not know that.
It's insanity, okay? Very disorganized, it's complete chaos. And so in a lot of these places, one of two things will happen. Either you'll meet someone who just walks up to your car as you're approaching the border, and they say, "Hey, you're gonna need a guide because it's a clusterfuck in here," right? And tip me, and I'll just expedite your process, right? And that guy inevitably is going to tell you at every stop, hey, you got to pay $20 for this, but you got to wait here. And then they come back and there's no receipt and you don't know where the $20 went. Hey, and it's $40 at this other stop. And I need $25 for this guy. And it's like, you don't know where any of that money's actually going, but my guess is like most of it's going into his pocket, if not all of it. And then border agents, of course, in some of these countries just straight up tell you like, yeah, you're not going to be able to pass. It's going to be 4 hours. But if you give me $20, I'll let you go. Now, we'll just skip the whole process. So.
Front of the line pass.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, another thing we're talking about is we talk about 20K a month passive. So you're there now. Mm-hmm. How long or what did you have to do to get to 20K? Because I think a lot of people that get into this business, they don't get into the wholesale. Well, some people do, right? They see the checks and it's exciting. Yeah. But most people get into it for the passive income. Wholesaling is just a mechanism. Yeah. How long did it take for you to get to the 20K a month passive?
Yeah. So, I mean, 9 years, Yeah. But and honestly, that's like I've sold some properties that I could have kept that would have added to that, cash flow. I've sold some properties that I had in my portfolio that were producing income, and I cut them for whatever reason. But it's a slow build. And the way that I've done it, it did take a very long time because I have in my entire portfolio, like I think I have, there's 2 or 3 hard money loans, and then I've got 5 30-year mortgages, and the rest of them are all free and clear. So it's taken some time to get there, but I bought my first rental property in 2013, and then I've just continued to acquire as I've wholesaled and been exposed to a lot of good deals. I keep anything that makes sense that I can then, pay off in cash and cross-collateralize assets and go to a bank and get lines of credit, which I know is a whole different subject.
Right. So I've heard some rules of thumb, keep 1 in every 4 or 1 in every 5. I've heard someone, Leon Johnson, who's on the show, he's like, his only regret is that he never sold any of his properties. Mm-hmm. So, like, do you have a rule of thumb that you're shooting for, or is it just play by ear?
Yeah, my rule of thumb is if it fits my buy box and I can afford to keep it, I'm keeping it.
Got it.
I've kept properties that other people thought I was insane for keeping because I could have made $60,000 or $100,000 wholesale fee in a day. Yeah. But I decided to close on it and put it in my portfolio because, again, I've always been focused on the bigger picture. I think it's really easy to get, excited about that quick cash, and it's understandable. I mean, to be able to make $50,000 or $100,000 on a single transaction, that's like life-changing for most people. So, having $500 a month in cash flow instead is not quite as sexy.
I'm still looking for those rent deposits on Instagram. I never see anyone post their rent deposits.
Right. Yeah. Mine's all electronic, so I don't even get checks in the mail. But
so you mentioned the cross collateralization, right? Which is an important important thing for people that are trying to have this model, right, owning properties to cash flow. So you want to just say high level what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So basically what I'm referring to is I will buy properties with cash, free and clear, unencumbered, and then I'll take a package of homes to a bank and I will have them give me a commercial line of credit on those homes. So once you have enough lines of credit, then you can just continue to buy more real estate with the money that the bank's giving you. My interest rates at a couple different banks are between like 3 and 4%.
Wow, that's really good.
I think 3.75 and 4% is where I'm at right now. It's basically prime plus 0. And so, I'm constantly trying to just acquire new assets that make sense. The biggest thing is you got to buy deals that actually make sense as a rental. But my other rules of thumb is that I like to, if I do refinance it or put debt on it, I like to be at 60 or 65% loan to value or less, right? And
why?
And be able to pull all my cash out because then I'm safe in a recession. If the market corrects and values drop, I don't think we're going to see another 2008. But if they drop or if that did happen again, I'd be totally safe.
Right.
I wouldn't even lose a night of sleep.
Yeah, you're protected.
Mm-hmm.
With making the kind of income you're making now passively, why can't you keep all of them right now?
Because not all of them work. Some I don't want to keep because maybe it's not in the right area, or it has certain features that I don't want to deal with, you know. And I will say there are deals where if the spread's big enough, I just go ahead and sell it, you know, because I want to keep revenue coming into my business so I can fund other rentals too.
Got it. Now, talking about these kinds of numbers, you must have a giant operation.
No, not at all.
So what's your operation?
So my operation right now is me and an admin assistant. And it's been that way pretty much since I started. I have at times over the years, you know, had a couple of other employees in acquisitions, dispositions, lead manager, but I've never felt like I enjoy simplicity in my life. So each time I've scaled it up, I've ended up scaling it back down and just keeping it simple. I've noticed that with a big organization comes a lot of payroll and a lot of headaches, and it's just not something that I personally want to manage or expose myself to. Having a small team and just doing the majority of the work myself not only allows me to have much higher profit margins, so at the end of the year I can actually net more than I might if I had a big team and, you know, did double the revenue, but it also gives me the freedom and flexibility to do whatever I want to do. I can travel, I can take off for a month or two at a time and go explore a different region of the world. I can go in the office at noon if I feel like it.
Right.
I go snowboarding every year for
I see those
at
pictures
least a couple of weeks
on Instagram. I get a little jealous. So how are you taking the inbound calls if you're in the Philippines or in South America? Like, how does that work? You got a seller, you're sending out a direct mail piece, seller calls. How are you handling those calls? Or if you're on a chairlift, right? Getting ready to come down the mountain. Like, how are you handling those calls?
Yeah. So I just answer it and say, I'm on the chairlift. I'll call you back. No. I mean, the reality is that's the downside to having a smaller organization is it's a little bit more complex to be closing deals when I'm in the Philippines because things aren't getting paid as much attention to as they were if I was there. I can't physically be at the property and face to face with the seller and all these things. You know, I have had trips where my admin assistant is continuing to answer the calls and then I'm just essentially sending a buyer to the property and they're closing it with the seller and paying me an assignment fee, you know, and just like we work it out that way.
So you have to have really tight relationships.
I've got excellent relationships with my buyers. I know some really great people in the Phoenix market, but the truth is the majority of the time when I'm traveling, I'm shutting off the direct mail and I'm not actually marketing while I'm gone. I'm not actively working that much while I'm away. I still am doing things while I'm traveling. I never really stop or clock out entirely, but that's kind of the downside of being a smaller operation is, you know, if I'm not working, things do kind of grind to a halt.
What, because with direct mail, I've always heard that you got to be consistent. So if you're shutting it off and restarting it, are you finding that hurting you in your business?
Yes and no. So it does give me an opportunity to kind of retool and find new methods when I get back, right? And sort of re-examine what I'm doing as opposed to just being on autopilot and sending out like the same stuff and same list and like just sort of going through the motions of doing the same stuff over and over again. But at the same time, it does hurt because when, you know, direct mail, there's always a ramp up period of, you know, 3 months or three mail cycles before you really start getting the calls. And like even today, like I haven't sent direct mail in the last 3 months and I still get calls occasionally from people that have like just been holding my letter for 6 months. Right. Yeah. So as you're sending direct mail and being consistent, which I agree is key, you're going to have more and more calls from not just the people that received your letter that day, but people that have received it in the past, and then it grows, right? But when I'm on a trip and I shut it off, it stops. Those calls stop trickling in, and then when I get back, it's kind of like I have to start it all over again and go through that ramp up phase again. So that is a little bit of a downside to doing that.
Is direct mail your only avenue?
It was. I've done. I'll say that it was my predominant source of marketing. I've done Facebook marketing. I've done some cold calling, and I'm now experimenting with Google AdWords. But direct mail has been the bulk of my marketing and where I've made like 90% of my money from marketing.
And so I've told some people, like, hey, where everyone's talking about texting and cold calling and RVMs and this and that. And I've said, like, there are people quietly, not loudly, quietly saying direct mail works. You're one of them, right? Mm-hmm. You're one of a handful of people who's like, yeah, dude, I still do direct mail. It's crushing it. Mm-hmm. But, like, yes, please keep telling people about texting.
Yeah. It's funny, when RVM came out, everyone was doing RVM and texting, like all these different, they were trying these different things. And my direct mail stats went through the roof. Yeah. Because like so many people stopped mailing, right. And I just kept sending out my mail and
Yeah, going against the grain definitely pays off.
Yeah, it's tried and true.
Yeah. So we're in Phoenix, and I don't know if you know this, there's a handful of gurus out here.
Yep.
So
more than a handful.
So how is your operation different than our peers?
Yeah. I mean, my operation is different for the simple fact that I'm more or less a one-man band. Mm-hmm. A lot of the guys in our market have the team and the infrastructure, and with that comes, the big overhead and the payroll and the big office and all that stuff. And I sometimes I envy that, because I say, man, I wish I had the ability to go snowboarding for a week in Park City and still have this machine that operates while I'm gone. But again, like going back to my original vision, my vision has always just been about building the passive income stream through rental properties. And so I do enough revenue with me and one assistant to be able to continue to build my portfolio and have the lifestyle that I want. And it just keeps my life really simple. I work when I want to work. I travel when I want to travel. I make plenty of money, and I don't have like the headache of managing people and having to like manage all these systems and the stress or the weight of like a really high payroll or a lot of overhead.
Yeah. If we don't close a deal this month, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're doing something right, because when we posted you were gonna be on the show, we had Jamil and Pace and Brian Manley.
Nice.
I was like, oh, we love JR. So
yeah, great guys.
You're doing something right. So then I guess, doing $1 million in revenue, how much are you wholesaling right now? How much are you flipping right now?
So like I said, I try and avoid doing a lot of flips because I don't like doing big rehabs. It's just brain damage to manage for me as a one-man operation. Again, it'd be different if I hired a project manager, which I might at some point, but for now I do all of it myself, and my assistant helps. I do probably 5 or 6 flips a year, like big rehabs, and then I wholesale a decent amount. Anything that I either can't wholesale or that just doesn't need a full rehab, or the margin is worth it, I'll take it down and list it on the MLS. I'm still licensed today, so I just list it myself, so I don't have to pay a listing agent. And then I have I do maybe 50-60 wholesale deals a year.
Gotcha. It's funny. I know we've been connected for some time. We didn't really meet until you and I both showed up to a random RIA, ASRIA.
Yep.
So I just thought that was funny, right? Like, there's all these different RIAs and this and that, and a couple of guys in town, but that's how we connect.
Yep.
So you were talking about direct mailing being your best marketing channel. The question that always comes up in every Facebook group is, what list? Yeah.
So my list is actually extremely broad. I actually have done very little marketing to distressed lists. I like to always think about where everybody else is not going. So, for example, everybody mails wants a probate list or foreclosure list or, whatever, right? And so I've always marketed to just more of a broad list. Anyone that's older than 55, I tend to see that, elderly or older population values convenience a lot more than someone in their 30s or 40s. So I've had better luck with an older population, and anyone that's owned the property for over like 10 or 15 years, more likely to sell. And then the callback ratio on that type of list is not going to be as high as something, a pre-foreclosure list or like a high distress list. But to me, it's just been very consistent, and I've gotten a lot more leads where there's not as much competition. I'm sitting in the kitchen. I mean, nowadays it's like they've got 10 letters on the table when you walk in, but back a couple years ago, it was like I was getting a lot of leads where I was the only guy they were talking to. And
so it's kind of like a cold call on a high equity list. Like, yeah, there's deals there, it's not as many people.
Right.
But when you find them,
Yep.
they're great deals.
Yep.
So one thing you and I were talking about offline was that your fee in Phoenix has gotten a little bit of a pressure.
Yeah. Big
So
time.
what was your fee 2-3 years ago? What's your fee today?
So my fee in 2017, 18 was between $23,000 and $27,000 average wholesale fee, and today it's like half that. It's like 12, 13 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, there's a few guys. Again, we can blame all those other gurus out there. So, then I guess running a lower overhead business, what is your monthly marketing? What is your monthly overhead?
So my monthly overhead is, I want to say, like between 12 and 15,000. That includes payroll and just all the systems and random subscriptions and stuff. I pay myself about 100,000 a year, so that includes my salary. And then marketing, I'm spending nothing on direct mail right now, but when I was sending, a lot of mail, I was doing maybe 20 to 25,000 a month, dollars, which is about 40 or 50,000 pieces a month that I was sending out. And then right now I'm experimenting with Google AdWords. So my marketing budget is actually very low because I'm sort of teaching myself this new skill set, and I'm actually experimenting with some virtual stuff because like the cost per deal here has gone up so much and the profit has gone down. So I'm sort of testing a virtual model and learning Google AdWords. So my market now is like 3-4 grand a month, but I'll scale that as I have proof of concept.
What is your cost per deal right now?
On direct mail? Oh, it's like 6 grand, 7 grand. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Between 5 and 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
Wow.
Whereas opposed to a couple of years ago, it was like 2 or 3 grand.
Yeah. Definitely things have changed just a little bit.
Yeah.
So what tools are you using, right? Because you're intentionally being small. What tools are you using that you could not live without?
Tools. That's a good question. I mean, everything that I do is so simple. It's like I don't have any fancy systems. I use Podio for my CRM. I use DocuSign. I couldn't live without DocuSign. I use CallRail for the phones. I really don't have anything like fancy that I use that stands out. It's all very basic stuff.
So then let me ask you this. Since you want to have a simpler model, simpler business, and you don't want to go too crazy, why are you in masterminds? I mean, I know you're not in one right now, but you've been in some. Why, if you're doing what you want to do?
Yeah. No, and it's a good question. And like I said, when we were talking before the show, I'll probably join another one this year. It's been maybe a year or two since I was in the last one. And I think it's such an important thing to continue to learn and grow. And, I have this thing, I never want to feel comfortable, right? And so as long as I'm surrounding myself with people that are better than me, smarter than me, and doing more than me, I'm going to continue to learn and grow. And I'm very competitive by nature. So it's, you never want to be the smartest guy in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So, guys, please ask your question. I think Derek Schultz is your newest fan. He's going to be his number one fan. Number one member in your fan club. He's loving what you're doing. Alexis wants to know, how often are you marketing to the same list?
I marketed to that same list for a few years straight with, intermittent breaks in between, but yeah.
Like every month, every quarter?
Oh, good. Okay. So I would mail to like let's say a list of 45,000 that was going to go out in a month. I would pull about 80 or 100,000 records. I would then split that into 2 months of mailers, and I would break it up into 16 drops. So I had 2 going out each week. So in other words, it was like 8 weeks of marketing, but I was splitting each of those weeks into two drops so that I didn't have like a flood of phone calls all on Monday. They were more scattered throughout the week.
Yeah, and that's what we had. We just did our first drop, and they all came in just a handful of days. So what is your biggest struggle at the moment?
Biggest struggle at the moment? Well, so I mentioned that I'm learning this virtual model. I started, because Phoenix is I'll always do business in Phoenix, but because the cost per deal has gone up so much and the profit margin has gone down, it's just so viciously competitive here. I'm always looking to go where other people are not. So I started venturing out and doing some virtual deals. I've done deals in a few different states now, and learning an entirely new, it's essentially like a whole different process in some of these virtual, or in some of these other virtual markets. It's like in Phoenix, it's hard to get a deal, but I can sell it in 2 seconds if it's a deal.
Yeah.
In Petal, Mississippi, I can get a deal pretty quickly, but selling it is like, it's like pulling teeth to get buyers to go to the property and call me back once they've seen it and commit and then get earnest money and get the title company to do what people just move at a different pace in some of these different markets. So the dispositions and obviously the marketing is a new challenge for me. I'm learning AdWords for the first time and kind of experimenting with that.
It is really fascinating because we're experiencing the same thing as well. It's just people just move at a different speed. And I've never considered Phoenix to be a high-paced society. I don't look at it as like a Los Angeles or a New York.
Right.
But clearly, the rest of the country is moving at a slower speed.
Much slower.
than we are.
Yep.
So D. McCall wants to know, what are some key traits you're looking for in your buy box?
I like, for rentals, I like a 3.2 or bigger. I prefer not, it doesn't have a pool, but I'll still buy it if it has a pool, if it makes sense. I like to be all in at 65% loan to value, which is tough in this market.
Yeah, very tough.
But as long as I'm 65%, of the ARV, I can package that and take it to a bank and pull 100% of my capital out in form of a line of credit and continue building those lines, and then have millions of dollars of the bank's money and just like unlimited buying power.
Those are all lines of credit.
Yeah.
They're not just sitting in your bank account.
No, I wish.
Okay.
I'm well funded. I use a lot of my own cash, but I use lines of credit and stuff too.
Yeah. What, how do you stay motivated?
I have, consistency is key. I think that doing the things that we don't want to do on a regular basis keep us sharp, and not allowing ourselves to get comfortable and complacent. Consistently doing the things that we don't want to do and forcing ourselves out of bed in the morning, forcing ourselves into the gym, everything, there's like this disconnect between what we think we want and what actually feels good most of the time.
Oh, massive disconnect.
So like going to the gym.
Ice cream always tastes great.
Ice cream tastes great, but you feel guilty immediately after, So yeah, I stay motivated by just constantly pushing myself and trying to level up.
Gotcha. Very cool. And what is your superpower?
I am extremely calculated. I would say I have just a sort of an innate ability to monetize every deal that I put my hands on, and a way of maximizing the profit on anything that I'm involved in. And I'd say that's my superpower.
What's the greatest lesson that you've learned?
Greatest lesson that I've learned. I would have to say that probably the greatest lesson that I've learned is that business is important, and it's a vital part of my life, and it's something I'm very proud of, but it's not everything. Right? I know that's kind of contradictory to like what a lot of people want to hear or thinking, but like I really believe that, it's important to make a lot of money and be successful, but there's no point in doing all those things and making all this money if we don't get to enjoy it too. So taking the trips, doing the things that we want to do, enjoying our lives, and being there for our family, and having fulfilling relationships, like that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And money and business, it's a way for us to like enhance our life to a certain extent, but enjoying it is the most important part.
Yeah. And I think that's often overlooked. So Dee's follow-up question is, Is there an age of home requirement you have? Single or two-story? Section 8 housing?
Nope. I'll look at any of it.
All right. And Isaac Avalos wants to know, does your admin cold call as well?
No.
What is he or she responsible for?
Right now, it's mostly just admin tasks. But when I was sending out direct mail, she was doing my leads management. She was handling some of the dispositions and transaction coordination, in addition to all the admin stuff, paying bills, paying vendors, some of my property management. She takes care of for me.
Gotcha. What is your plan then with the virtual?
So I'm still kind of figuring that out, but I contradict myself by saying that, I want to keep my business simplistic and small, because it's very clear to me that in order to scale the virtual model to any kind of, a large amount of revenue, like, I'm going to need help. So I am in the process of kind of just like figuring it out, building out the systems and the processes, and then I'll most likely be hiring for acquisitions, dispositions, and whatever else I need. So it's funny because I'm like, my whole thing is to keep it small and be simple, but this is something that it's very clear, like, I'm going to need help with. So I will probably be hiring for this.
And who do you plan on, networking, connecting with to help you build out this model?
I'll probably be joining a mastermind, like I said, this year, probably in the next few months.
Yeah.
I've got a great network of guys that are either, highly sophisticated and successful in real estate, or specifically in the virtual model. So I bounce stuff off of them all the time as I'm figuring it out. Brian Manley's one I'm like, I'll be hitting him up. Answer your phone, bro.
That's that's where I was leading to, right? Because we've had several guys that have actually been on the show already. We got Brian Manley, we got Nick Perry, we got Sean Terry. Corey Boatwright was coming up soon. So like, there are a lot of guys doing it really well virtually.
Yeah.
So you're very well connected. You got the right people.
It's a very scalable model.
Yeah.
Corey's
saying that constantly in our Facebook groups. He keeps pushing us to do it.
Yeah.
So
I like the idea of acquiring assets in other markets too, because the rental numbers compared to Phoenix. I mean, Phoenix, I'm thrilled if I can buy a property for $100,000 and it rents for $1,000 a month. But in like, Indy or Alabama, like, you can buy stuff $40,000 all in and rent it for $800 or $1,000 a month. Like, those numbers are just too good to be true to me. The property management's a bit of a logistical challenge that I'm not sure that I want to take on, but again, if I can figure that component out, that's a very scalable part of the business. I'm also looking at doing maybe some lease option or seller financing stuff as an exit strategy, so that I can remove the logistics of the management. But that's all kind of to be determined as I figure it out. But again, I'm going back to my focus of passive income, and that's, for me, always been the goal and will always be the goal. Wholesaling and flipping is just a means to generate the cash to acquire these assets, because for me, that's what true freedom looks like.
Right. And I've actually had conversations with Jamil about this, and he's betting, and I don't think he's wrong. He's betting that a lot of money is going to eventually flow into the Midwest, because A, the numbers make ridiculous sense. And B, people are just finding places to park their money. You see the stock market going crazy, real estate going crazy, crypto going crazy. People are just looking for somewhere to park their money. He thinks it might just flow to the Midwest, and it's been a rental market for so long but they might actually start experiencing appreciation.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah. Let's see what other questions are there. So Ellen was asking about marketing. We already talked about that. Alexis wants to know how often do you pull your list?
The list I was pulling every 2 months. The one that I was pulling directly out of the tax records. So I wasn't even paying for that list when I was doing it. I mean, I've paid for lists over the years, and those if I'm paying for a list, I'm probably marketing to that list, 5 times or so, because I want to maximize it. But when I was pulling it directly from the tax records, I would just pull a new one every other month.
Right. And then the follow-up question is, are you using a hold open title policy?
On anything that I'm flipping or wholesaling, yes.
And Francisco wants to know, if you were on a tight budget but want to do direct mail, do you have any suggestions That's a tough question.
Yeah, that is a tough question. Direct mail is expensive, man. I would say, I guess we'd have to define a tight budget, but, keep it super simple. Like the direct mail, I think people, any type of marketing, I think people have a tendency to overcomplicate it. I use letters, right? But I think postcards can work just as well. So I would go with a postcard. It's cheaper. I would figure out a way to pull a free list versus having to buy on list stores and go from there.
It's fascinating. I used to think direct mail was expensive, but then once you hire cold callers and you text, right, or you do PPC or any other form of marketing, even RVM jobs. With RVM jobs, you have to drop tens of thousands of people, right? You can't just RVM drop 1,000 people and expect anything. You have to drop a lot of people. It all works out to be about the same.
Yeah. Well, so the irony is, I'll tell you a story. I remember one time I changed my mail piece. This guy sold me at a printing company. He sold me on the idea of sending out a mail piece that had this fancy text responder thing on it where they could text and get the offer. And it was he said, your response rate's going to go through the roof. And it's true. My response rate was much higher, but it was way more crap leads. Mm-hmm. And it was just more garbage to sift through to get to the deals. The number of deals were really not any different than the mail piece I was sending before, but I was just doing way more work, comping all these additional properties from people that wanted an offer. And I find that that's kind of been my experience with Facebook and with cold calling. I go through, direct mail, I'm anywhere from 12 to 15 leads per contract. Whereas cold calling, I'm 50, 60 leads per contract. Facebook, 50, 60 leads. It's a lot more legwork to just get to the good one. Mm-hmm. So you end up paying for them either way.
Yeah, I after going through all my experience, I don't think direct mail is expensive anymore.
Yeah,
relatively speaking.
Well, and if you put a value on your time as opposed to just the money that you're spending on it, then it's a no-brainer, right? I would much rather have fewer leads that are higher quality and more likely to convert into deals than just a boatload of leads that are 90% junk.
Right.
So
I see you, posting a lot, Instagram, Facebook, kind of live vicariously through you, right? Single, traveling the world. I remember you had this ridiculous motorcycle in Vietnam. Do you have any concerns, problems, there's this thing that happens as you become more successful, and I think that's something that affects a lot of newer people getting into the business, whereas you have success and you share your success, people kind of don't like you for that. Did you have any of that experience?
I would say I really try to remain humble, and I live fairly modestly for my income and the success that I've had. I wouldn't say that I've experienced any sort of, there are haters, right? Let's be honest, there's haters.
Yeah.
I did go through a divorce recently. I was married for a couple of years and I went through a divorce, and she came after me for a lot of money. That was a big learning lesson, so anyone new or getting into relationships, I would say, protect yourself. If you're getting into a business partnership, protect yourself, right? Prenups and business contracts with a clearly defined exit if it doesn't work out, I think are necessary. I lost a lot of money and I learned a lot from it. But as far as how it's affected relationships with other people, I can't say it's had a huge impact. I'm pretty low key. I'm not single anymore. I've got a girlfriend now. She's amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm fairly low key, so I haven't had as many haters as people that are maybe in the spotlight and more publicly known.
So I've kind of gotten the reputation. I always say be careful with partnerships, right? Don't do a partnership unless you absolutely have to. So you mentioned having a clean exit or a contract, whatever. What are some things that someone needs to look at if they're thinking about doing a partnership, doing this wholesaling business together?
So my suggestion, I've had a couple different people approach me with, the proposition of partnering, and I've considered it. I've never, followed through with any of them because it just never felt right. And I like simplicity. I like what I have going on. I don't feel the need to complicate my life with a partner, but But partnerships can also be like really beneficial. And my suggestion for anyone considering getting into a partnership is to partner with someone in business who, offsets your qualities. Like you want a yin and yang, you want one person to complement your skill set, not, the two of you are good at the exact same things. That would be my suggestion, right? But my other suggestion is to get divorced before you get married, so to speak. What does it look like if 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, this just isn't working, and for whatever reason you want to dissolve the partnership? Nobody wants to be in court battling and fighting and spending a bunch of money on attorney's fees for a year, however long it takes to sort through all that stuff. So outline it in the beginning. What is the worst case scenario, and what does that look like, and how do we make a clean break if this doesn't pan out the way we think? And then there's a lot less confusion and things to sort out if and when that day comes. Hopefully it doesn't, but
I love the way you put it, though. Get divorced before you get married.
Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So you've got a lot of properties. I would imagine your tax liability is not very high.
You'd be surprised. So I do enough revenue in my wholesaling and flipping business that I pay a lot in taxes. A lot more than I'd like to. Yeah,
okay.
Still.
Well, because that's one of the reasons why I'm intentionally acquiring more rental properties.
Yeah, but I will say owning real estate, it has incredible tax benefits. I got a great accountant who, handles all that stuff for me. I ask a lot of questions and I read books on it too and educate myself. I don't just strictly rely on him, but I did a few years ago, I did a cost segregation study on a bunch of my rentals. I think it saved me almost $50,000 in taxes that 1 year. So now every year I do a cost seg on anything that I've acquired that year that, that makes sense to do the study on.
So let me ask you this, because cost segregation is something that comes up a lot, in our masterminds and so on. And they talk about, doing bonus depreciation to reduce your tax liability that year. You're basically just bringing it in earlier.
Yeah.
Are you 1031ing in that so that you can do it again, or do you just keep that property forever?
I've never done a 1031 exchange. It's probably something I should educate myself on and get familiar with, because I do think as I buy more and more real estate, or especially as I acquire larger assets, that it probably will make sense to start 1031ing and saving the tax, because I've only sold a few of my rentals, so I try not to sell anything. But I'm also kicking around this idea right now, like in this market that we're in right now, the values are so high that I'm realizing, if I don't sell it when it's at this value, I'm essentially buying it again at a much lower cap rate.
Right.
Because if I could move that money somewhere else, I could probably get a higher yield and, put it to better use. But I don't want to pay the taxes. And so the 1031 thing it's not something that I've done, but probably something that I'll educate myself on and try at some point.
I need to talk to someone really smart about this thing, because we talk about bonus depreciation, and that's cool, right? You're reducing your tax liability. But if you 1031 it, you don't have to repay it.
Right.
And then you can depreciate the next asset.
Yeah.
So why not bonus depreciate, 1031, bonus depreciate? Because once you do your bonus depreciation, there's no more depreciation.
Yeah.
Right? So the rest of the time, the lifetime of the asset. So why not 1031 and do it bonus depreciation again?
Yeah. I don't know. I think you might have to repay it. I'm not positive.
At 1031, I don't think you have to recapture.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Need to find someone really smart. Guys, if there's someone listening that's really smart about accelerated depreciation and 1031s, I would love to have a conversation about this. Maybe we'll record it, post it in our podcast. So guys, if you have no more questions, we'll wrap it up here. So I want you to think about any last thoughts that you want to leave them with. I think you've had a lot of powerful messages, but come up with a last thought. Guys, if this was valuable for you today, please like, subscribe, share, comment. It's the signals we need to give to Facebook, to YouTube. Tell them that this is valuable content so we can reach more people, so we can create more millionaires. Tune in next week. We got Brian Aregpu. He's flying in from Houston. He's going to be talking about how he was able to make 6 figures a week during COVID using creative financing, right? So if you want to make a little more revenue, you want to learn about creative financing, Brian's the guy. So, last thoughts.
Okay. A couple things. Just to reiterate, right? Enjoy the success along the way. There's a great book that I read once called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. and it's
That's a great book.
You know the book. It's a fantastic book. And this girl, what it is this girl she's a caregiver for people who are elderly and dying. They're terminal in most cases. So she has conversations with them about their regrets in their lifetime. And a lot of these people say, I wish I wouldn't have worked so hard. I wish I would have spent more time with family. I wish I would have done the things I wanted to do, right? And I think that is such a crucial error on the part of so many entrepreneurs who have all this success, and it's like it's ingrained in us to keep pushing and grinding and building and doing more and being more. And somehow, like, so many people, myself included, get lost in that journey, and like life will pass you by really quick. But the reality is, I don't want to be at the end of the road super rich and looking back at all the opportunities that I missed, things I should have done, or having regrets, right? And the truth is, I mean, nothing's promised. Like, I get killed in a car accident tomorrow. I could get paralyzed in a snowboarding accident next month. And I guarantee you, I wouldn't be laying in that bed thinking, I wish I would have worked harder and made more money. I'd be thinking, man, I wish I would have gone to Vietnam. I wish I would have, taken that trip to Turkey. I wish I would have done the things that I really wanted to do. I wish I would have spent more time with my family. So those things, I think, are so important. And success is amazing and it's important, but you got to enjoy it along the way.
Right.
And you just got to carve out time. Like, people always ask me, how do you just stop everything and take off? And I'm like, dude, I close my eyes and I book the trip. Like, I literally don't think about it. I just force myself to do it because, I don't know if I'm going to have that opportunity later on.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll say, final thought, is, as wholesalers and real estate, investors, we're exposed to so many good deals and good properties. And, I knew a lot of people back in the days of the trustee sale that wholesaled a ton of deals and made millions of dollars and didn't keep a single one. And the truth is, this market that we're in, it's not going to last. These prices aren't going to keep going up forever, right? It's going to correct at some point. And no matter how good you are at something, your income can change. Your business can change. The market can change. So
we experienced that with COVID.
Yeah. So my advice to people is always like, just save some of those properties for yourself, right? Stockpile. If rentals aren't for everyone. Not everyone wants to be a landlord or have a rental portfolio.
Other ways
There's other ways to create passive income and freedom from this business. But I always, I'm biased obviously, but I always suggest to people, don't be one of those guys who wholesales a million deals and then has no portfolio. And one day, if wholesaling, the model of wholesaling changes or your income goes down, you suddenly aren't able to sustain the same lifestyle that you want, right? So that's my advice: is save some of those properties, build a portfolio, create passive income, and that's true freedom.
Yeah. I was actually reading a statistic last week. I was like, there's no way this could be accurate. Only 16% of realtors have rental properties.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
For an industry where you buy and sell real estate. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, thank you.
Yeah, man. My
This
pleasure.
was fun.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys. See you guys next week.